of all, we're so glad that you're here. And we are recording this. So welcome to our interview tips for great placements. This is one of our sessions of our volunteer basic series, and we're glad to have you all here. We've had several of these, and they've been just absolutely wonderful with all of your attendance and the input that you give, and we just love it. So join us for the remaining sessions. We have 2 more coming up. Next Thursday, we have orientation and training, and then we have engaging and supporting volunteers on November 4th. We also want to make sure you sign up for the volunteer conference. That's November 30th and December 1st. Those are some afternoon sessions. The whole thing is virtual, just like this. And we have some really phenomenal speakers coming up. In addition to those wonderful nationwide speakers that we have coming up, we want you to know that we also have some of those participants or those speakers are going to do a session before that leads into the conference. They're going to kind of bounce off of each other, but they are also things that could stand alone if for some reason you can't attend the conference, which I hope everyone signs up for. And then there are some sessions that'll be afterwards too, but they are phenomenal. So we want you to join for those. And we are working on that training session. So look for those. And I know we bring this up every time, but just in case this is the first time you've seen it, these trainings are brought to you with a partnership through the AmeriCorps agency. Michigan, through the Michigan Community Service Commission, which is where we're from, obviously, we have received something called the Volunteer Generation Fund. And this goal is to make sure that we increase the number of volunteers that are volunteer opportunities and giving people opportunities to serve in the state of Michigan as volunteers. And how we're doing that, in one part of this, is making sure that we build the capacity and the skill set of our volunteer professionals. Christina and I have both been in this kind of work for an awfully long time. I know some of you have too, but it's something that is near and dear to our heart. And we are always in this career set, we're always all about sharing what we know. And so this is really an opportunity to help you build your experience and your skill set. And then we also provide things with technical support too. We hope that you'll join us for those sessions as well. One that we have coming up here pretty soon, and Christina and I will send something out about this as soon as we have the date nailed down. It's about the skills-based volunteering. Whenever we talk to our 13 partners, which is probably who you heard about today's session from, one of our partners are like Angela at Advancing Macomb. We have a partner up in the UP that we love working with. And basically our partners cover every inch of the state, just about. And the idea is that we're going to work with them. But every time we talk to them, they say, when is the skills-based volunteering platform coming? And it's coming. So we're going to have a training available for all of you that Christina and I are going to help moderate. But we have one of our other colleagues who's going to lead that. So we're excited about that. And in the end, this is all about increasing your reach and your ability as a nonprofit to engage more volunteers. That's really important to us. So that's what the Volunteer Generation Fund is meant to do. And we think we have a really good start with this series of trainings. So today we're going to have a poll. Christina is going to launch that poll for us. If you mind taking a few seconds while we introduce ourselves, if you haven't been to one of our sessions before. My name is Melissa Sherry, and I've been with the commission now almost a year. I started November 1st, and my career has spanned I'm almost embarrassed to say, but it's been about 25 years. I'm getting old. and it's all been in volunteer management. We really love what we're doing here. And Christina's just asked me to do something that I don't know how to do.
I'm so sorry, Melissa, to interrupt your introduction. I can't set the poll.
How do I do that? How do I do that?
Go to participants.
Okay. and find you down here?
We're both in as MCSC staff. Folks, we're really sorry about this.
Oh, sorry.
I'm a little foggy because I haven't been feeling well. I should have told her about this before.
Do you want me to, what do you want me to do?
You need to click on more,
Okay.
and then it should give you the option of making me co-presenter.
It says ask to start the video or chat or pin. Why don't can I just stop the video for a second?
Sure.
Or share your screen? Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay. I'll pause my share. Does that work? Did that work, Christina?
Not on my end.
Oh, okay. Do you want to, what do you want me to do?
Can you see my screen now?
Yep.
I want you to click on polls at the bottom.
Okay. Okay, so here we go. I see the poll come up. Oh, I have to say launch, right?
Right.
She usually does this part. So here's our first poll.
All right, Melissa, before you were so rudely interrupted,
No.
go ahead and finish introducing yourself then.
Oh, okay. So as I was saying, I've been in this field a long time. Christina and I actually, our paths crossed years and years ago, and we were both running volunteer centers. She was up in the UP. I was down in Lansing with the Capital Area United Way, great organization. I know Robin's on the phone with us, and we got to know each other then. And then later on, I went to Sparrow, and I was there for about 15, and then COVID happened, and I came over to the commission. But I've worked with lots of organizations on helping them build their volunteer programs out. And it is something I absolutely have a passion for. So I'm delighted to be here. But with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Christina.
Okay, Melissa, I'm going to have you share your screen again. It's not going to let me advance slides. So it looks like we're going to have one of those Zoom days. But my name is Christina Kobe. I'm the volunteerism coordinator at the Michigan Community Service Commission, also known as Volunteer Michigan. I have been a volunteer manager for a little over 20 years now. I've loved every single second of it, as I know that you do as well. But being a volunteer manager isn't easy work, is it? So when I got an opportunity to come to the commission, I felt so privileged to know that I was going to be able to help develop resources, gather resources, and make connections for you as a career field. In an arena, because the important work that we do is just that. It's incredibly important. You provide people the opportunity to make their communities a better place to be. It enriches their lives as well as the lives of the people that they serve. So I consider it a huge privilege to be a part of the commission as well as just a part of your peer network.
Yeah, so we are just delighted to have you with us. So as we go forward, let's talk about our objectives for today. So we're going to talk about that, the importance of the interview process and also the placement process. We're going to talk about you developing your own process for this and talk about some interview strategies that will work and also some placement practices. The idea that we want to say is that this is not a one-size-fits-all kind of interview approach or a placement approach. You have to look and see what your organization needs. What your needs are may be very different from what a next door neighbor's nonprofit's needs are. So take that with a grain of salt, that everything that we're going to provide to you today is something that should be flexible and reflect what your needs are. So with that, we're going to hop into this next one. And I want you to, in the chat, to talk about what are your needs and challenges. I'm going to give you an example. We would do lots and lots of interviews when I was at Sparrow. And one of the things that we found was that even though we invested in them in the interview and gave them time and got to know them, sometimes that they didn't always follow through. And then we interviewed them, we were excited, thought they were excited, and then it went nowhere. And so we had to, that was an issue that we had to address in our interview and placement process. So what are your challenges? If you wouldn't mind putting those in the chat and tell us, what are your needs? What is it that you need to learn from that interview that maybe we haven't thought about, or what kind of challenges do you have? I'll give everybody just a couple of seconds to put those in there.
Melissa, while they're doing that, I'll share one of the challenges I used to have when I was at the helm of a volunteer center in Sault Ste. Marie. We prided ourselves in that intake interview process. But the reality was, when we were hot, and it could have filled my schedule on any given week to do nothing but interviews, especially certain times of the year when we were a United Way volunteer center. We were in the newspaper a lot, we were on the radio all the time. And so people were really starting to think about how they were going to become engaged. And that's a great problem to have, right? That our schedule is so full that we really need to stretch out those interviews so that it's not eating all of our time. Yeah, so we had to devise ways to either make our interviews more concise. One of the best solutions that we came up with was training a volunteer team leader to actually conduct those interviews. We looked for an HR professional, a human resources professional that had quite a bit of experience in interviewing people. She actually taught us quite a bit, where she helped us understand what questions are appropriate, what questions aren't appropriate. We were always asking, we thought we were asking the appropriate questions, and we were, but maybe the wording needed to be tweaked just a little bit to make it even more appropriate. So that would have been one of the challenges that I had for sure.
I have some things in the chat from Leah. Should internship interviews be different from volunteer interviews? This is something I struggle in determining. I would say you're probably investing a little more into an internship because that person's going to be there every day. I think that some of the questions could be the same, but I think you'd want to dig a little bit more with that intern, because there's sometimes an intern, you're expecting them to come in with a skill set, and they've got to prove that. So it might be things like you need a writing sample, or you want to test on some skills and things like that. So I would say yes, even though they may not be getting paid, you're probably looking for a little more from them than a volunteer who you're expecting you're going to train and show them those skill sets. So I hope that's a fair answer.
Yeah. Heather's got a comment also about their greatest challenge is having a lot of college students coming in needing X amount of volunteer hours, whether that's an internship or maybe it's a class requirement, and then they have to write a paper on it. And then they might just kind of drop off. That's unfortunate, but I think we've all had it happen, haven't we?
Yeah.
So just making sure you ask that question of, you have this requirement of these number of hours. How do you see yourself fulfilling that number of hours? And get them thinking about how they can keep up with it.
One of the things that we had a lot of different opportunities, and the ones that tended to falter a little bit more are when people had the option of just picking up their hours versus working them into a schedule. And I had much more success when I kind of pinned them down to a schedule. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. And then what Paula says here about some folks want to work right now and no screening at all. And then they might get a little upset with you when you like, oh, well, hold on, put the brakes on. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I respect that. Different types of interviews and placements, volunteers versus interns versus community service. Yes. And job placements like Michigan Works and AARP. Do we vet everybody, even for large community events? I would say on that, I would have like a backbone of questions, which we're going to actually provide you with like a library of questions, and we're going to ask you about that in a minute too. But yeah, I would say that some of them are different. Obviously, when they're court ordered, it's a little bit of a different situation. And I wouldn't even like, if you ever do like group interviews, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, I wouldn't mix those by any means, because I think that there's value in getting to know each. Or the other thing is sometimes it does require that just an individual interview. Yeah.
One thing I will add though, Melissa's spot on, making sure that you know your audience, and your audience is the potential volunteer, right? So just remember that there is a volunteer position for everyone. It doesn't mean that that volunteer position is something you need them for. So if someone is court ordered and they have some offenses in their background, that is just makes them not a good match for your organization and the position that you're looking for volunteers for.
Yeah.
That's going to happen from time to time. The reality is that somebody that has findings in their background screening, you can unapologetically show them other opportunities, maybe outside of your organization or with other community organizations that are a better fit for them. Let me give you, for instance, we used to have a rehab center for men come to us every fall. I don't know why it was just the fall, because it was kind of a revolving door, but it was the fall time of year where they would sponsor a Make a Difference Day effort. And they really wanted to rake leaves for seniors. The reality was that wasn't a good fit for them, because a lot of times, especially senior citizens, they want the young man to come in, sit down, have a cup of hot cocoa. It's chilly outside. That then gives them access to a person that is vulnerable, a senior citizen. We actually had a nightmare happen with that situation. They asked to use the restroom and they raided the medicine cabinet. These are things that you really don't want to talk about out loud, but the reality is they happen. Doesn't mean that someone that's in a men's rehab center doesn't have something to offer. You just need to be careful in how you match them. Make sure that you're not putting the population that you're serving at risk, and don't put that volunteer at risk for setting them up to set them up for failure.
Yeah. And Zaquan, I totally agree with your comment here. You have to make sure that you're assessing motivations. Well, let's move on here. So I asked in that, like, how are you setting up and structuring your interviews? There's a lot of different options. The first one is, I'm wondering, and does anyone do any virtual, like, do you do a Zoom meeting where you do an interview? This was obviously before COVID, but one of the things that we were finding in our organization is that interviewing people was time consuming. And I would have volunteers that would help us with the interview. And sometimes the interviewers had some better skill sets than others did, obviously, right? But with that, we would still find that sometimes they would not, and the volunteers would not end up following through, and we've wasted all this time. We've done a background check, we've screened them, things like that. And so one of the things that we found was doing a group interview, and it's just a group interview for people who are on paper that look just fine. And they might want to do 4 or 5 different things. We never did more than 4 people at a time. But the nice thing is that they got to know each other, and we noticed that increased our follow-through rate. How many people just ended up going on to being active volunteers because they would meet somebody, and they had more of a connection than to just us in our office. But having that connection to the team is really, really important. And then the other thing that we did is, and all of you have touched on this, is the follow through. So what we would do is we worked out our process, and this took a long time. It's not something we could do in a day or anything like that, but it ended up being a process improvement project for us, that when you came in for your interview, we were basically able to get a bunch of stuff done in an hour's time. And then we would do their screening. And then if there were no issues, we would place the whole group. And then before they left, they would have their date of their training. They know who was going to train them. They would be, ready to go. And what we found was that really improved our retention rate quite a bit. And then they went into training and their orientation continued. We actually had an online orientation too, but today's not about orientation. So let's talk about like the structure of the interview. Whenever I have done like special needs, and I would consider anyone to be special needs if they're like court ordered, if they have a disability and we recognize they have a disability, if there's just something that is out of the norm. And we would do one-on-one interviews for those situations. The other thing is, and I think that's probably just a really good idea. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But the other thing that when we would have a group interview, if we were not going to accept one of them, we didn't place any of them right then and there. We had the script that we used that said, the interview is just one step in our onboarding process. And I'm going to take some time and talk this over with my director, and we'll get back in touch with you. So within, 30 minutes, we could get back in touch with the other folks. And then I could handle the one that was a concern, so that nobody felt odd or, out of place, that kind of thing. So let's talk about what we want to get out of this interview. First of all, I would suggest for all of us that we don't make the interview something that's so formal. Look at this person here. They look like they are just going in for a big job. And I have had people that have shown up like that, and it kind of like, oh, I didn't want to scare them. I didn't want to alarm them in any way. And I've had people saying, oh my gosh, I was so nervous about this. And so we actually started using a different term, and I can't even remember the term right now, but we stopped using the word interview. And, and it was only for that purpose. And I'm not telling you have to do this, but it was only for that purpose because we were hearing people be very intimidated about coming in and being interviewed. And so we just found a different term for it. No big deal. Did the same things, but that's how we did it. But some of the things that we were looking for in our interview was, are they a good fit for our culture and values? And then we would spend a lot of time exploring their motivations. We would also talk a lot about like what's going on in their life. Tell me about you. Tell me where you're going. Tell me, if someone is about to graduate college and gosh, their expectation is they're going to be with you 2 months and then they're going to start grad school. Well, that may or may not work for you. For our organization, sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. But there are certain things that they couldn't do anymore because it was just going to take way too long. And I'm sure you have those situations too. But the idea is you want to be able to start launching a relationship with that person and getting a feel for who they are. And then you want to understand, what are their other commitments? Like I said, the person going off to grad school, the person who, has childcare issues, the person who, has, they're recently retired, but 4 days a week, they watch their grandchildren. Well, what are they going to do that next day? I mean, they want to volunteer for you 3 days a week, maybe not, and then it's also a screening tool. And I think you've all mentioned how you use that as a screening tool, not maybe directly, but you're definitely saying that in so many words, that you have to have concern for the family's well-being, both emotionally and physically. That's making sure all these things are there. And then setting expectations. One of the things that we would do in the beginning of our interview, because no one wants a warm body approach. I mean, none of us want that. Just because you have a pulse doesn't mean you're qualified or you're going to be a good fit for the organization. But we would start right off with kind of a disclaimer that, our goal is to find the volunteers with the, there's somebody's coming in, find the volunteers with the best skills that fit our needs. And then we want to develop a long-term relationship with you. And we would ask for a minimum of a 1-year commitment. Now, when they couldn't do a year, that was okay. And we found more and more, and I'm sure it's even more so now, with the way that things are changing, people are changing jobs, people are doing things very differently. We have to renegotiate those. So, and you have to find out what works for you. If you need to have a year, if it could be project by project, what are you negotiating with that person? So setting those kind of expectations and setting the expectations about the things that you're going to, how you're going to support them. One of the things that we would talk a lot about in the interview is that the consistent feedback. We're going to give you feedback at every stage, from your training to after you take your orientation test to, down the road. We'll always be giving you feedback, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent. And this really helped me a lot as a professional. And we're going to talk more about this in that one on the 4th of November. But I used to feel like, oh my gosh, I hate having to talk to someone about a work performance issue or a behavior issue. That took that all out, because we put it in terms of, we have this much respect for you, that we want you to succeed, and we are going to coach you. We'll get to that later, but the interview does start to set those expectations. If you have anything else you want to put in the chat about that, I'd sure love to hear you. But those are the basics for like what you need to get out of it. And you may yourself have very specific things that you need to find out during that interview. But here is a basic recipe for an exceptional interview. The first part is opening the interview. And this is when they're getting to know the interviewer, and the interviewer is like letting, the person, share a little bit about them. And I would just say, tell me about you. And then they might start spilling the beans on all kinds of stuff, and it's fine. I mean, it's fine. I'm going to talk about questions to stay away from, but 9 times out of 10, when you make that connection, they're going to tell you a lot of these things, and it'll help you. It'll help you guide them towards the right kind of placements. But opening that interview and having that disclaimer, like I said, was really very helpful. And it was my out, whether I knew I needed an out either way, and to decline the interview, the potential volunteer. And then I would have question banks, and I would have like 3 questions under each one of these titles, and that we could pull from. And it is really important to have questions that you as an interviewer are having ready at the waiting. And if you have a group, you don't have to ask all of them the same questions, but you can jump around and use your best discretion and your judgment here. If they open the interview and they answered the first question, which is something about their motivations for seeking volunteer work, you might delve into that a little more and say, tell me a little more about that. That's perfectly fine. So the questions about seeking volunteer work. I remember that there was a time in like 2008 to probably 2010, maybe beyond that, we had a lot of people that were coming to us because they were hoping it would lead to employment. And that was like every single interview. And it was like, they tended to, get really disengaged pretty quickly because their heart wasn't in it. But when you did meet volunteers who really were very connected to your cause and they didn't have an ulterior motive, then, you can tell that, but that's always a good thing to kind of get out of the way. And you may yourself have some experiences about their motivations that you want to kind of flesh out from them as you start talking. But then another area is talking about their skills and work habits. Under this, we would ask, what kind of things do you have to give? What kind of experiences do you want to share? What kind of, how do you like to work? If it's someone like today, I mean, years ago, it would almost be unheard of that we would say a virtual volunteer. What is a virtual volunteer going to do for us? But yet organizations adapt. And so we may have a lot of virtual volunteer opportunities. And you want to see when they talk about I want to work at home, how are you going to connect with them? I mean, how is that going to work? And, do they are they someone who likes to answer their emails? Are you able to have them? Are you able to do checkpoints with them in the evenings when they're done with work? How is that going to work? So, working, kind of getting a sense from those kind of special issues are really important during the interview. And then overall determining if the organization is a good fit and a good placement. One of the things that we'd say in the disclaimer is that, if you're not a good fit, we are still going to help you find a volunteer role somewhere else. And so it was kind of our thing. So we didn't feel so bad about it, but I would work to help them find another place to volunteer. And it was their choice if they wanted to. But, this is probably one of the most important things, is that it's not that you don't want diversity. You do, but you want to make sure that this person is going to be a safe person to work in your organization. It's going to be somebody who can grow in the organization, someone who has the availability. There's 100 reasons why someone might not be a good fit for you. It might just come down to time and not something really negative. So then on the closing the interview, that's all about making that connection on those next steps. And the sooner that you can give them their next step of what they need to do, and that it's guided and it's structured, that's all part of the placement. And, you just move them right into it. And before long, they're doing it. So we've got some other things we're going to talk about with that, but the closing the interview always had action steps afterwards. And they were guided by us, very structured, so that we knew we would get them to the next place. And timing is everything on that. It doesn't mean that they don't get screened. It doesn't mean that they don't get trained. It is all about their training. And we would always call that, we got to the point where we called it onboarding, because they're not actually doing it yet, but you're making sure you're watching, you're shepherding this person through this process to make sure that they're going to get to the other side. And someday you're going to give them a volunteer award and they're going to be there for National Volunteer Week and be able to celebrate them. And we all know that there's a lot more into that, but that's what that goal of closing that interview is about, is getting them to the next step. Let's talk for a minute about questions to kind of stay away from. Now, it is always okay if the person wants to tell you these things, but if the individuals in the interview, you cannot base your decision to accept them on these questions. And I'm sure we all know this, but I just want to point this out. Specifically asking if you're married. That's kind of why I would always ask the question, well, tell me about yourself. And I would do it kind of like that. Tell me about yourself. And so they're like, oh, hey, I have 3 kids and, okay. Now, I never made the decision that they couldn't volunteer with us because they were married, or maybe I thought they were too old, or, do you have a disability, or, they weren't a US citizen, or they had, capacity, sometimes the capacity issues were a thing. But let's talk about these. Obviously, it's probably not going to matter, but if you decided to decline somebody, they could come back to you later and say, hey, it was based on these things, I think. And then it puts you in a bad situation, a tough situation. So I'd say just kind of stay away from these. Now, this issue about a disability.
Hey, Melissa, this is where I just wanted to add, remember earlier in the session, I had said that we engaged a volunteer team leader to assist with intake interviews. We engaged an HR professional. They know this list of questions that you can't ask for fear of discrimination. And Melissa's got many of these questions here. Even if you don't engage an HR professional as a team leader to do your intake interviews, at least consult one, just to make sure that your interview process is on point and not getting into any gray area of inappropriateness.
Yeah. The questions that I'm going to send to you, the question bank, they were vetted by the organization that I worked with at the both the legal and the HR. So you don't have to copy them by any means. I mean, they may not even fit exactly what you need, but it kind of gives you an idea. Now let's talk about this one about a disability. If someone's sitting in front of you and you're just realizing this, you shouldn't ask them if they have a disability. However, if you can tell from the application, which is always about kind of doing your homework beforehand, we would always review the application. I would review it. Another person in my office would review them, and then the interviewer would review it. And if there were any like red flags that either one of us staff people saw, we would not have someone else. We wouldn't invite them for a group interview. We would always, handle those ourselves, or and a lot of times when they would have a disability, we'd know they'd have a disability. We would have an individual interview, and it would start with a phone call. Hey, I just wanted to call and talk to you about your application. You said that you had, this going on. And 9 times out of 10, we would take them. And that was one of the areas of working with individuals with different abilities that I always had a passion for. There's a lot of resources that are out there to support folks with disabilities. And I would say, just be honest with them about how, this could work out. A lot of times we would decide on having a job coach. Sometimes they would come to the interview with their supports. There was one time we had an individual, and I felt kind of bad about this, but she had taken some college classes. So she signed up for a college interview. She came and she's with these MSU students who are probably the top kind of MSU students that they could have. They're all pursuing medical careers and nursing, or they're going to be a physician someday. And these are just like highly dedicated students. And we had this poor girl in there, and her skill set, it was just such an imbalance. And I felt bad about it. They were very kind to her. Everyone was very kind to her. We asked her the questions, things like that, but we were stuck at that point. And so we didn't place anyone. We called them back later and told them, okay, here's what we'll do. Here's your training date, things like that. But that one, we went back and we said, hey, we'd like to have you come back in for another interview. And she brought her mom and she brought her case support. And in the end, as we were talking, there were just too many things that were a problem. And one of them, she had an impulse about digging in trash cans. And I know that sounds really weird, but we can't have that happen just because of the fact that it's happened once before. And we would do training on this. You can't just go down and push a trash can down, because we've had people get poked with needles, and people put things in the trash that they're not supposed to in a healthcare setting. And it's not usually nurses that are doing it, it's other people, unfortunately. So we were like, oh my gosh, that would be a really big danger to her. We can't do this. And her supports ended up talking to mom and saying, there's just no way. This is just not an appropriate situation. But 9 times out of 10, it is a great thing. And we've had people who are blind. They have made just phenomenal volunteers. People really connected with them. We've had people who are quadriplegics and wheelchairs. And the nice thing is our organization was accessible. It may or may not be accessible in your case, so maybe there's other ways to engage with them. And then we had lots of people who were trying to get back into the workforce after an injury. So but those success stories wouldn't have happened unless we sat down and we just had an open mind about what could happen. But I've had plenty, on the other hand, that their illness or whatever wasn't controlled and it just wasn't going to work. So, but we do also have to be careful about those age and capacity related issues. And you have to be careful how you ask those questions. I'm not even kidding. I've had 2 volunteers that were 100 years old. And they would wheel people out after surgery. Now, where they were wheeling them out was not very far. They had to be monitored. We had to test for the competency to see that they could do that. And maybe not everybody would have that kind of thing, but if you have somebody who is older and they can't drive anymore, but you need them to get to the agency or whatever it is, these are things that you would have to kind of find a way to ask those questions. So you can ask these questions in different ways to get the information if it is important. But having that bank of questions means that you have a consistent way of asking what those important things are that you need, and that you don't put yourself in hot water just trying to think of a question. Now, how many times has this happened where you just had some red flags about that person, and and it's the one about like, hey, I want to start right now. Why do you need to start right now? Obviously we're going to have to do some screening. I mean, come on. And we know that, right? That's our frustration, but they don't know that. But what are those red flags? So when you're meeting with them, what about their eye contact? Are you able to, are they avoiding contact? Are they, is there something going on there that you're just not sure about? The ease of being able to answer questions. I worked with an interviewer once who told me, watch out for the pregnant pauses. And he was a recruited all over the country. Look for pregnant pauses. and those are like just that ease in answering it. That are they telling you the truth, or are they telling you what you want to hear? And then the communication skills overall. I had a really sensitive thing that we were doing for a while, where victims of domestic violence or sexual abuse, that they are by law supposed to be offered an advocate if they'd like. And I had a lady come in and she wanted to do this. It was very difficult to get her to like answer the questions. I was stunned. I mean, she was, I think she herself was traumatized, is what I think I'm trying to say. But I had to think about the safety of the patients and the perception of the patients who were in a very vulnerable situation at that time. And I said, absolutely under no circumstances could I say that this person is okay to do this. Well, the program themselves decided they wanted to go ahead and give them a try. And if you just saw my face, you'd say, what? And one of my friends happens to be one of the nurses. And she said a patient showed up and that is who they encountered. That young person was the person they encountered. And she thought that, the person wasn't able to communicate. She thought that person was going to give her an exam. And she said, I'm not doing it. And she left the ER. Well, she also needed medical care. So she came back the next day hoping not to see that person. And can you imagine? So it is really critical that the people who you're working with listen to you too, because it's very important. So that look for those, are they able to answer the questions? And then their general attitude and emotional reactions. Are they someone who's argumentative, or are they like way over the top about things? We would have lots of different kind of opportunities, and sometimes working with children, and people would break down crying. Why are you doing that? This isn't like the best opportunity for you. The questions they ask about your organization, they could raise some red flags. So listen to those. What about their maturity and stability? A lot of times volunteer roles in smaller organizations, there's more people around them, and it's a little closer knit thing. So you can kind of watch for those kind of things. But there's also times when you do have to really trust this person, and that they don't have the maturity and stability and emotional maturity to be able to handle situations appropriately. It can cause a lot of embarrassment for your organization. So look for those as a red flag. What about those hidden agendas? I had somebody tell me that they wanted to save all the patients. They wanted to save them so that they would go to heaven. And I'm like, oh, no, we can't do that. And then I've had people that were really honest that they're doing this for an experience. That's fine. But, we structured it. We were prepared for that. So kind of knowing and maybe talking about what are the motivations that you're seeing from people, and how can you use those motivations to your advantage, even if originally they're not exactly the most ideal. Think about people in terms of being equal. I honestly had a team that really looked at the agenda for college students differently than they looked at them for adults. Like adults, and I don't mean that they're not adults, but for like adult community volunteers, that they said, well, they're getting something out of this. And there was almost like a little bit of emotion on their part from this. And it's like, we should be using that. And so we kind of flip the script a bit, where, you want that experience. Here's some of the things that we need. And what we did is we learned a lot about technology through them. We were also able to help empower them to use some of their leadership skills to help support other students. And then we were also able to make sure that they didn't have really different expectations of this role than what the reality was. And so once we kind of worked through all those things, we had a really high functioning, really smooth operation for our college students. And when we would do our satisfaction surveys, we would have the areas that we worked on, we had improved drastically, and their motivations, their satisfaction level was always very different than our adult community volunteers. But we'll talk about that later too.
Hey, Melissa, we have a question in the chat. It says, if you do encounter someone with many red flags, how do you decline their offer to volunteer? I have a story about that.
Well, can I say this first?
Sure.
I am going to give you a script for this, and you can change it however you want, but I have some tips. One, a very soft voice, very kind, apologize, I'm so sorry. And then don't do it. Talk about that actually next, but you can go ahead with your story.
Yeah. So we had, I was actually helping a local hospital with their volunteer program in shape. And we were in need of information desk volunteers. And I thought I'd found the perfect volunteer. He was very outgoing, had a great presence. He was always dressed in a suit coat. He was working out wonderfully until he wasn't. He had this innate need to jump up and hug people. And although he meant well, he didn't mean any harm. We all know that many people aren't comfortable with that happening, especially when you're going into a hospital, if you're not feeling well, if there's germs that can be spread, et cetera, et cetera. And so I simply had that conversation with him. And I said, we're going to have to tone that down a little bit. Do you think you can do that? And the reality was, as he tried to tell me, he said, Christina, I can't sit that long. I can't sit at the desk that long. I thought it would be okay. I'm sorry. It won't happen again. And I said, well, let's just try it out. Let's not make any promises to each other, but let's just feel it out for the next shift or two. And if it's still not working for you, let's find something else. Well, the reality was, he didn't like sitting. So we found something for him in what they called stores or supply chain. Down in the basement, he was running different cases of supplies to this section and to that section. He actually got some exercise that he was really hoping for. And there were plenty of other volunteers down there that he could work with and socialize with, which was his real motivation. He was trying to break the isolation, was his motivation. But the reality was he also needed some physical activity. So remember, a red flag doesn't mean they can't volunteer with you. It may mean that they can't, but it doesn't immediately mean they're no longer a good volunteer candidate.
Yeah. So then the two other things would be a concern about harm or liability. So make sure if you have those kind of red flags, I would take a step back. If you have any kind of inkling of it, trust your gut. Don't place them right then and there. You don't have to do that. You can think about it. You can have somebody else interview them. And then you need to be able to be comfortable in verifying their basic competency for the role that you have. Now, let's talk about some interview safety tips. One of the things I say is just make sure that it's not considered a super formal, but it's structured kind of environment. And then never reject a person face to face. That's never a good idea. one, it's going to be an emotional thing for them. They've already invested in the application, probably. They've come in for an interview, but, you know, I mean, that's just the way it is. But don't do it face to face. Always do it over the phone. I don't even do it via email, just because, you know, I have something in writing about that. But being really kind, being very, you know, being apologetic and, you know, thanking them, setting them up, thanking them for, you know, coming in. It was really nice to meet you. However, you know, we're not able to do this at this time. And I'd like to offer you the opportunity. I can help you find another organization. Sometimes I would be really clear about why, you know, unfortunately, because the timing of it, I don't have anything else for you, or that, you know, we don't have the structure to be able to support you, or we don't have that opportunity that you want, or whatever. But I try to make it, you know, a soft landing on that one. And then here's the other thing. I don't know how many do background checks, but the background checks, I never argue about the result of that. I have a script for that too. And there's some little things that as you're reading it, you'll probably see are kind of setting it up to, you know, I just, you know, I wanted to, you know, give you a call and talk to you about the background check that you authorized. And so they authorized it. They should know what's in their background. And all these little things that you say lead up to it. And you can adjust it however you like. I really would never get confrontational. I always made sure that I was just, that is a really good question. Is there a cost for a nonprofit to do each background check? No, through the iChat, the state of Michigan. I think every organization should be doing that. I do actually have a training that I've done on how do you set that up and everything. And I'd be happy to offer that if people think that that would be helpful. Maybe it would go into the week after the 4th if you think that would be helpful. But no, there isn't. And Kelly, I can help you with that. So I would also say, reach out if there's anything, you know, like that disability, or if there's anything else on there that you could touch on. And I've talked about this already, but, you know, the job coaches, structuring the position so the person's able to participate, being open and forthright about trying something different, and being realistic and trust your instincts. And the bottom line is whatever you decide to do with that person, if it's a person who there's some red flags about their behavior, I would say, hey, you know, you might want to be able to structure it this way. One of the things that happened to me, and this was really unfortunate, I was at a point where I had different staff coming in and out. Our staff had switched over, and I was fairly new to the organization at the time. And I guess I hadn't been real clear that there was an individual that I said would be okay in one place, but not another. And unbeknownst to me, he went and talked to really one of my administrative assistant, and she went ahead and she put him in pediatrics. Well, that was never a place I intended him to be. And he kind of had an isolated job. So one of the lessons I learned is, if, you know, to be really careful about that and really clear that the placements are really important. And you should always make sure that no one is authorizing a change because you know the reason why you placed them there, that, you know, you're the only one to authorize a placement if that you're that professional that's doing that. Here's some placement practices, and I want to be conscientious of the time here. We would always in the interview give a person a time to really look over that position description. And then we'd ask if there's any reason they could not meet the competencies of that position. And, you know, to also think about how much time that person has to serve, and more time isn't always better. How many times have you heard someone say, I want to give 4 days a week? And that is not realistic. Plus, it just ends up every single time it happens, in my opinion, it usually turns out bad. The person gets a little too comfortable. They get a little too, they get almost resentful sometimes when it's just too much. So structure that from the beginning that, you know, we want people to volunteer like twice a month. we're looking for you to volunteer with us for a long time, and we want a good relationship. When someone comes in and they want to do 15 things for you, that's also kind of a red flag, in my opinion. We would always start them with one. And then, if you want to pick something else up after we've gotten to, a little more time.
So leave them wanting more.
Yeah, I'm going to get back to that. Okay. On the out of state ones, I'm going to get back to you on that. And then having a process where I've talked about this before. So the training happens, very quickly after acceptance. And then the roles really do need to match their motivations. That's how you keep them engaged. and then follow up at key times. We would have this, we had it all mapped out on a volunteer onboarding cycle. It may be different for you than it was for us. But 2 weeks after their interview, they should have either had their training, or if their schedule is crazy, it's scheduled. Okay. And so we would check in with them. Hey, how's that going? How was your training? How, did you meet people? We would just check in on that. And then we would check in at 6 weeks. And we'd say, hey, you know what? We are just so glad we've heard this. We give them some feedback. And then we would also say, is there anything you have questions about? And then when it got to 2 months, that was the other thing that we would check in, and we would be asking them for feedback. And it wasn't like, do you like it? Hey, tell me, what is it that we could do better? What are some things that you see that you maybe would like to explore? Do you have questions about? And we get into that. And when we started doing that, it really had a big impact on how we were learning from them. And then also, how do you keep re-recruiting them? And then the other thing is having an engagement strategy. That was actually part of our engagement strategy. And our engagement strategy almost came down to, you need to give them more work. And we love that. But and then also putting mentors in place for them. This is someone who's their friend, who's connected to them. And it's really intimidating for people to come into an organization and not know anyone, or maybe know one or two people, but a lot of them are coming in for connections. So how can you build those? And then no matter what, planning for a number of touch bases and making those very meaningful. And we have some tools that are going to help with that. So what we're going to send to you afterwards is our sample interview questions. Some of these are motivational, some of them are situational or behavior based. And I know I didn't go really deep into those questions, because I think when you'll see those, you'll be able to take those and modify them to your own situations. But you'll see which ones are kind of like, tell me about a time that you weren't able to fulfill a commitment. What did you do? And then we have a sample interview form that we're going to give that looks for, like, what are the kind of things that you're looking for, and it'll help you kind of decide what you're looking for. And then that follow-up tool for the onboarding period, and also some of those, when you have to decline someone. And then I can follow up on the things about the out of state. I will follow up with you on that. So, oh gosh, we're 3 minutes over. I'm trying to get, we have one more poll for you too. And let's see, do I need to do that again? Do I need to launch that poll? Or can
yes, you need to. I'm so sorry. I don't know what is different this time, but it's not letting me control anything.
Oh, that is so weird. Okay. How do I, it's saying share the results from the other poll. I'll just stop my sharing. How about that?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you launch it now?
No, it won't let me share anything.
Okay.
It has us both logged in as the same. So it thinks you're the only one that can control.
Oh, okay. I got it right here. Okay. Here is our poll. If you take just a moment to do that, and then we'll be following back up with lots and lots of tools for you.
You need to share it or launch the poll.
I did. Yep, I'm getting answers.
Oh, good. Now this is really interesting. I'm not sure what we did different, but we'll want to do this differently next time. I can't even see the poll.
Oh. hopefully others are able to see it. I mean, we're getting questions, so.
As everybody's rounding out their poll, thank you for being with us.
Absolutely.
We're really enjoying being able to provide this basic series to you. Don't forget that in the coming weeks and months, there will be additional training sessions available to you. Don't forget to register for our volunteerism conference at the end of November and December 1st.
You know what? I don't think that, I think this might have been the wrong ones. Linda brought this up, and it's the one, oh my gosh. This is why I don't do this part. I think that we did it on the position descriptions.
Oh no.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is
Yes.
not our finest hour.
Oh, it's totally okay. We will send those out to you, though. We can send oh yes, and we'll send that link out for the conference as well. Absolutely, Kelly. And Teresa, we will provide the slides. And thank you, Linda. Oh my gosh. Okay, well, I'll go ahead and I'll close out the slide, but the poll, but I want to thank everybody for being here. We really do appreciate your attention and attendance today. And hopefully, hopefully you received something valuable from this. And I'm so sorry about that poll, but we are really glad that you were here today. So join us next week. And we'll be back with another really exciting topic, and we'll be following up with some tools for you. Thanks a lot, everybody.